All right. Hello, friends, and welcome back to another exciting episode of Our Life, Beginnings and Always, Baxter's Route. This episode is particularly exciting because not only are we going out to hang out with Xavier, which I'm really excited to do, but also today, October 15th, is my birthday. So it kind of feels like we're going out to celebrate my birthday. Is that lame? Maybe a little bit, but I'm really excited to see this next scene and just chill, have fun, maybe make fun of Baxter a little bit. So let's get into it. Baxter brought the car to a stop in a parking lot wedged between skyscrapers. You'd arrived at the theatrical bar you attended years ago. Inside, you were ushered through the lobby into a main room by an usher. The sight of it was as dazzling as your starry-eyed recollection. Smooth jazz backed the scene, played by a live band. Some members looked as if they might be the same from before. That's exciting. The bartender was definitely someone new. Oh. But that was for the best, since you weren't sitting at the bar. Instead, you snagged a booth with enough room for a party of 3 and were passed an appropriate number of drink menus, alright? It was still a bit early to start drinking, but you guessed right then that it wasn't going to stop Baxter. Only when the host was finished and gone did Baxter take out his phone. I'll let them know we've arrived. Okay. Baxter grinned playfully, buoyed by your own positivity, and put the phone away. His attention was set on you, even if the topic wasn't.
You know?
Xavier is a delightful person, I agree. That's nice. You had to imagine a person would be required to be a particularly pleasant and thoughtful individual to build up even tenuous friendship with someone as closed off as Baxter. One thing you could already give Xavier regardless of whatever else was that they saved your friend from being entirely alone before you'd found him again. You were grateful for it. Xavier strolled through the door shortly after a set of waters were placed down around the table. They ditched the apron that day, which made perfect sense since you were meeting up casually outside of their place of employment. Though it suited them so well, it was a stable part of their look. If Xavier had worn it out, you bet strangers would have just accepted it as entirely correct anyway. Your eyes met across the open space of the bar. Baxter stood to welcome them. Xavier wasted no time linking up. Good evening. He held his hand straight out for a shake. Xavier went with it, giggling.
Always a pleasure.
Hi, Baxter and Kit. Thanks for finding the time to see me after all.
Oh, yes.
Of course. You and Baxter sat side by side. He'd rejoined you there while Xavier slid into the opposite bench. Hi. They shot you a grin and scooped up the third and final menu.
Well?
Are you ordering anything? I am. I want a martini. It suits the atmosphere of this place. It is appropriate. Resting his arms in front of him, Baxter draped himself dramatically over the table. And finally, I can have a real Bellini. Figured. They have a non-alcoholic drink menu. And you decided on, I don't drink alcohol, so, I don't really like sparkling cider. Elderflower cordial, I don't know what that is. Fruit only martini, I can only imagine like a cup of grapes, you know, maybe a strawberries in there. Tropical fizz, Shirley Temple. Specifically, cherry cola. The worst flavor of cola. Interesting. Whiskey sour mocktail, virgin pina colada, Arnold Palmer, Virgin Mary, citrus sunshine mocktail. Interesting. Let's say cherry cola, but in real life, we know it's just like a normal soda, right? Like, but let's say cherry because that's the only thing this game is giving me. Since everyone was decided, the order was placed as soon as the waiter came by. He jotted down the requests, collected the menus, and promised to be back shortly. Then, the second he was out of earshot, Xavier shot a pinning stare at the two people sitting snugly across from them.
So?
You knew where this was going. Unlike Baxter, who would gleefully avoid personal questions, Xavier was nothing if not persistent when it came to getting the specifics. Decorators did have an eye for details. Are you going to explain what kind of dynamic you two have going on? To pick back up what I said over the phone, you were acting like Kit was a coworker, and now they're staying at your place. I do not understand. Baxter threaded his fingers together while leaning forward. He grinned, cordially. This challenge didn't faze him any longer. With as much audacity as someone who could ask a baker to make a wedding cake with 3 days' notice, your good friend gave an apologetic answer.
Honestly.
It seems I was being dramatic. We will continue spending time together after all. Xavier matched his squint, pairing that with an exaggeratingly neighborly smile.
What's the dynamic here?
I can see that, clearly, but what was happening to begin with? I really kind of want to let Baxter. I want to see how he says it. Period. Baxter squared his shoulders, looked Xavier straight in the eyes, and divulged your shared history. He didn't hesitate or leave anything out to save face. Okay, nice. The unideal reality of the past was laid out in its entirety. Swirling their longest strands of hair, Xavier found the whole of the story much easier to grasp than they had only hearing the end. Okay?
To be honest,
I'm not surprised in the slightest. As pleasant as things were when you stopped by the bakery, I always assumed if you stopped having client-based reasons to visit, you never would have spoken to me again. Damn, Xavier. Looks like I was right on that assessment. Baxter's gaze dropped. He couldn't help it. Developing closer ties could never make him ashamed, no matter how odd the circumstances. Doing the inverse, however, might always remain a source of guilt for him.
I apologize.
It's not your fault. I have no talent for maintaining relationships that aren't entirely unavoidable, and sometimes not even then. I get it. Trust is always a work in progress, right? I'd say we would have become actual friends eventually, but Kit giving you a push can speed that right along, okay? Baxter lifted his face at that, speaking softly. Xavier was a nice person. Yeah, I think so too. Drinks arrived shortly. Your little group mutually took that as a closing to the interrogation of Baxter Ward and Kit Thicket. After serving the order, the waiter left once more, saying to call him if you needed anything else. Xavier and Baxter put a pause on any future discussion to sample their stuff. By their delighted hmms and hmms over the flavor, that sounds pretty much the same, but okay. It sounded like the bar was a hit with both. Though Baxter would probably appreciate any alcohol over the mocktail he'd gotten the last time he'd been here. Yours was delicious too, especially without the cherry part, right? The three of you stayed quiet until Xavier chimed in with the next major topic of this meetup, Juden Scott Adams' wedding. How'd the day go?
Perfect.
It went off without a hitch. They're a wonderfully stable couple.
woohoo!
They whistled. The odds were beat, that was for certain. By all accounts, you should have been informing Xavier how the last-minute preparations ended in disaster. Yes, and your cake got rave reviews from the guests, of course. Of course.
Phew!
I can sleep easy knowing I made a cake for a crowd who enjoyed it, and for a couple who should actually be getting married. I'm happy for them. Some of these jobs. Shivers ran through Xavier's body. I feel like I'm making a macabre Lee. I've never put a Lee on the end of macabre. I've never said macabre. Macabre? I don't know. A beautiful feast to celebrate a horrible mistake. Baxter chuckled at his colleague, his fellow in creating matrimonial bliss, and his match and insight for when the happiest day of someone's life is not quite so happy. While I attempt to believe in every pair who comes through my office, it's difficult to avoid the occasional wallow in cynicism. The wedding industrial complex will do that to you.
Of course.
Or it would have if I hadn't already possessed a streak of pessimism when it came to relationships lasting, but we've gone down that track. Xavier's manicured lashes. Manicured lashes? Okay, never heard that before. Fluttered as they rested against the back of the booth. They sighed in relief. Relaxing time was over after 1 minute, and they tilted forward again. Now assured their efforts weren't in vain, Xavier could indulge in juicier ponderings. Hey, what bakery made that groom's cake? I admit I took a peek at what was under the cover when I dropped my own off. It was cute. Thanks. Ooh, so many of these are really good. I like the way that this one creates like a name for it. That's the way that I would have gone personally. I don't know that I would have named it Kitten Baxter Bakeries, but you know. I do also like, oh boy, you're gonna get a kick out of this. But honestly, my first thought was to give it a name, so Xavier actually jumped up in their seat. I like their expression of like, what the fuck?
What?
They settled down and gingerly patted their coiffed hair, making sure it was still in place. Surprises after surprises. You're squishy under that stiff suit of yours, Baxter.
Come on.
As though that's actually a surprise. They giggled, the sound akin to the bell of Zake's front door. True, that part isn't. You and Kit baking a cake is. Is it? You might be surprised. Don't you recall it wasn't the first time we've been in a similar squeeze?
Oh!
Wait, you're right. Those mystery cupcakes. From the auspicious start, you and Baxter told more stories from the wedding. Eventually, it transitioned into Baxter sharing especially memorable moments from other jobs he worked on. Some highlighted real-life potential pitfalls you could work to avoid if you ever got married, while others were one-in-a-million debacles. The most unbelievable was a story of a particular orchard-set wedding. A ceremony had been prepared with flowers, a walkway, seating, and a bespoke wooden arch at the end, okay? As the planner, he was doing a final survey, primed for the guests to arrive, when an out-of-control truck with a back end full of apples barreled straight through. Baxter stressed that the driver was fine when he managed to come to a stop, and the couple was still married, albeit in a much simpler arrangement, so no real harm was done. However, Baxter distinctly recalled the comedic surrealness of it. Seeing a completed ceremony, the fruit of weeks of work, and then having it flattened to the ground in the blink of an eye was something he never expected or hoped to experience. But for all the misery of the moment, he did confess the debacle made for a great mood setter going forward. He shared the memory with every couple he'd worked with since, to help put their own struggles into perspective. Hey, at least you're not getting run over by an apple truck, right? It warmed your heart seeing Baxter so at ease. None of the carefully maintained distance remained between him and Xavier, or him and you. There was no sadness or sense of loss when it came time to part ways. After all, this didn't have to be final. You had the power to reach out again if you wanted. The bill was split, and that got paid before saying goodbye to the baker. With a cheery wave and a grin, Xavier left for home. This feels very emotional. More emotional than I feel. But I do really like Xavier, so. The music was good and the drinks weren't done, so you and Baxter were in no rush to leave yourselves. Light conversation was made. Thank you for keeping me company all this time. Thank you for coming to see my moms. I was happy to see them. It's been too long, even though it hasn't been long at all, barely a whole month. He tapped a finger against his glass, watching you and smiling sweetly.
I get it.
I can understand why their presence would be missed. Your family members are lovely people. Baxter was so nice about your moms and big sis. That was something you deeply appreciated. Your family meant a lot to you. But you couldn't forget the offhanded way he noted his own parents in his list of people he lost contact with. Hey, do I have the okay to ask about your mom and dad, or should I not?
Oh.
Baxter's fingers, which were gingerly wrapped around a champagne glass, twitched. It's fine. He placed the cup down with a clink. Because we are friends, I can share some insight into my mysterious, opaque life. Baxter might have been able to form quips as glibly as ever, but you hadn't missed the dullness in his eyes. To start, I haven't spoken to my parents in, a few years now. That's what I meant when I included them in the list of relationships I haven't maintained. So they weren't talking at all. He frowned. Even if making new ties seemed impossible to him, what would make Baxter cut off the family he'd always known? Those questions stayed within the confines of your head. This wasn't the time to interrupt. He felt your sharp reaction and gave a tight smile. Don't worry, it isn't a painful topic for me exactly. Mostly I find it disappointing. Frustrating? Certainly awkward. Shifting in his seat, Baxter leaned on his elbow and angled his body towards you. Before I cause too much concern, they've never done anything to intentionally hurt me. My parents have always cared for my well-being, and I can't deny how much they've done for me, all the opportunities and advantages I had because they provided them. They gave me the best they knew how, and Baxter cut himself off, raising one hand and using the other to pinch the brow of his nose. He was thoroughly unimpressed with his own ramblings. This is not as nuanced as I might be making it sound. What a novelty it would be if I could speak favorably of my own family. Can you imagine? That's not the case, however. Dark brown eyes stared into yours, as serious and unmovable as they were whenever he demanded the listener to grasp the depth of the chasm between him and them. What I'm trying to say is that my parents are, on the whole, good to me. I thought there was going to be more besides just good to me. Okay. And they do love me as their child, whom they raised for nearly 2 decades. Just as I still feel compelled to give them the credit for the minimum, I'm certain they're telling their acquaintances endless excuses for why I'm so distant and unagreeable with them. They haven't given up on me in their own way.
But
All that does not make them good people. I can assure you that because they are not good people. I'm merely a rare exception to the unpleasantness. My parents are selfish. They're sheltered, even as adults. For example, you, Kit Thicket, are absolutely extraordinary in my eyes, thank you. The warmth in Baxter's voice when he described you burned into a bitter ash. But I doubt they would see it in that way.
I swear.
Based on quite a colorful variety of factors. Baxter suddenly raised his voice and arms, almost knocking over his own beloved Bellini, not the Bellini. And their nonsense priorities and concerns are what my parents expected from me. Baxter quieted down again quick. He was in public, and you weren't the person he wanted to be shouting at anyway. After straightening out his jacket, Baxter crossed his legs under the table.
How wonderful.
Or how ironic that I can finally see the silver lining of my lifelong struggles thanks to them. If I never realized how poor my connections were, or if I never cared that my relationships were nothing more than associations based on conveniences, maybe I'd have been who they wanted. Regardless, I'm not their ideal son. They're not my preferred company either, and I don't expect you to ever meet my family. That's honestly for the better. I get it. Baxter had barely mentioned his parents 5 years ago when they were closer. Still, it wasn't nothing. He'd given small crumbs of insight into the dynamic when you knew him before, and had bothered you ever since. When you were teens, Baxter laughed off every concerning line about his family. Knowing how the story ended changed the way you saw those early chapters. I feel like solely for the sake of, recording and having content, I should ask about it, but I wouldn't. Personally, I wouldn't. But for you guys, hey, do you remember when we talked about how we got along with our families before?
Hmm?
You taken him by surprise this time. He raised a brow. Back when we went to that hotel, you asked about my family and I asked about yours. You said something about how there were problems, and they'd really be problems if your parents weren't your parents. Yes, I think I did say something along those lines. It was so silly back then. Imagining myself as not their son and not someone they loved seemed meaningless at the time. They did love me, that's what mattered. Of course, it's not always enough, is it? If I wasn't theirs, either through birth or adoption, if I was someone else's son, they would hate me. I know I'm foolish on many counts. It took me a long time to realize that them being hypocritical shouldn't reassure me the way it did. Baxter Ward could have as many shortcomings or problems as he did, and it'd be fine because it was different in that case. There were reasons, can't you see? But they couldn't see that other people deserved the same kind of understanding, and that some things weren't problems in the first place. Mr. and Mrs. Ward were not people you needed to build up a rapport with, that much was more than certain. Damn! I mean, yes, I certainly don't like them, but I wouldn't say that to his face, I don't think. I guess this one, no kid should have parents who make them miserable? I don't know. Agreed.
Maybe.
Who knows? Maybe one day I'll cobble together a family of sorts of my own. I stopped running away whenever I got close to another person. That's the first step. None of these are nod. I'm here for you. Maybe a little bit of a pat-pat, but I'm here for you. Every fiber of your being was working towards a single goal, conveying to Baxter that you were there, and you would be as long as he wanted you to be. Baxter whispered gently, and you knew the sentiment got through.
That's sweet.
You're very kind. Though rest assured, I'm not as heartbroken over my lack of familiar bonds as you would be if you became estranged with yours. There wasn't much to lose. While I could wish it was different, it never has been. I'd only be theorizing about pointless what-ifs. And with the circumstances I have, not interacting with my parents remains preferable over the stress that came with having them around.
Honestly.
I'm happier with the way my life is right now than I have been at any other time. I can stand on my own 2 feet. I understand myself better. I have friends. So I would hope you can be glad for how far I've come rather than sad that there were hurdles to overcome. Managing a smile, you gave him an answer from the heart. You're happy. I'm happy. You've done a good job, Baxter. Thank you. For a moment, you connected with one another, genuinely, sincerely, and wholly. That was until his ever-familiar Cheshire cat grin took center stage.
So,
At the very least, I can be grateful that I don't have the thick-headed parents the bartender and diva were saddled with. Despite yourself, you laughed. That was a completely unexpected reference. Baxter used the opening to continue reminiscing about what had happened the day he'd invited you out to drinks so long ago. It was intentional. He didn't want to linger on the heavy topic of his family, but it wasn't forced. Baxter didn't have to pretend he was doing well, it was true. He could carry on with his head held high, and you'd get to be there from then on. It was something to be glad about. Soon, the time to move forward did arrive. There were other adventures to be had. You and Baxter hopped in his car once again, and the bar disappeared behind you. Neither of you had eaten since that morning. I'm sure the bar serves food, but okay. Your grumbling stomachs decided that you'd eat at one of the nearby restaurants rather than going to the apartment to cook. When you were done with yet another stop and back in the car, it was well into the night. You'd been away from home for at least 12 hours. One might have thought, after frantically finishing a wedding, the day after that would be comparably less jam-packed. Nope. It had been your 5th or 6th subsequent day of squeezing every last minute of the day for all it was worth. You couldn't keep track anymore of how long you'd been tossed about by this whirlwind of activity. Your amicable companion in the flurry didn't bat an eye at the pace. In fact, it hadn't budged a hair out of place on his perfectly styled head. The darkness of the world and the lateness of the hour meant Mr. Ward had reached his height of energy. It was under those circumstances when Baxter offered up a new proposition.
Does that sound alright?
God. Of course you are going to ask. You want to go dancing? Huh? He elaborated. I spent the whole of the wedding working, if you recall. Even though we stole a little time after the event had finished, that was hardly comparable to having a night out together. Especially when you consider the circumstances that lingered between us then. And we can't forget that you'll be leaving soon and I'll have to start new client work shortly. So why not take advantage of the moment we have together now? Here you'd been thinking you'd already made the most of the day. Apparently, Baxter considered your gallivanting around 2 towns to be just the lead-up to a yet-to-come grand finale. I get that, but where would we go without signing up for it ahead of time? And actually, would something even be open this late anyway? Nighttime dance clubs in SoCal aren't exactly known for their formal ballroom dancing. That gaping hole in the master plan couldn't fluster Baxter, as expected. He has his ways. I know a place. Now, it wouldn't be as attractive of a location as the Adams Affair, however, it's entirely functional for our purposes. To add to the effect, we could visit the apartment and change into something more appropriate. It's a shame I haven't gotten a single chance to wear a true suit yet. This standard everyday look does not count. The car stopped at a red light, and Baxter made the most of that opportunity as well, turning his head to face you directly. His expression was hopeful. All right.
Thank you.
He chirped sweetly. But when his eyes went back to the road, he was smirking deviously. Baxter channeled his growing energy into a taut grip on the wheel. Finally, I can have a friend. Finally, I have a friend I can dance with whenever we wish to. The light turned green and he hit the gas. Your back pressed into the seat from the rapid change of momentum. There would be no rest for the wicked. It made you snicker. His enthusiasm never failed to delight. You arrived at the apartment building, went straight up to Baxter's floor, and through the front door of his place. Without needing to reiterate the latest scheme, you and Baxter split off into your respective rooms to get fancy. You? Me? How many outfits did I pack for this little vacation here? Like, do you really think that I've pulled out all the stuff? I don't even know if I have stops to pull out, let's be real. And I don't know what dressed a bit nicer than your norm means. I don't know that I have anything in between norm and formal. What, business casual? I don't know that I have anything that qualifies as that. When you were originally packing for this trip, you'd brought a few items in anticipation of the wedding throwing a few hurdles. Such as, what if you accidentally spilled something? Or what if you tripped and tore some part of the fabric? Realistically, you knew these situations were unlikely, and even more so, they weren't the end of the world if they did occur. But keeping a backup stored away avoided any potential issues. And now you'd have the perfect outfit for your next big night out. It could have just been the same from the wedding, but okay. Digging hastily, you found what you needed in your suitcase and shook out any wrinkles that might have been hiding there. It was ready to go. When you were dressed, you found Baxter already waiting in the living room. He lifted his head and a thin smile pulled across his face. Of course, he would know how to put on a suit in a flash. That's a really bad suit, but okay. Baxter was dolled up in a sleek and stylish brown suit that highlighted his eyes rather than trying to distract from them. And tonight, they looked clearer than ever. Hold on, I have to take a picture of this particular suit so my best friend can make fun of me for it. Because there's a character in a different kind of dating sim that isn't this one who looks very similar. We'll just say that. Yikes. The longer you stood there, the more his expression warmed fondly. He almost couldn't believe that you were willingly there for him. I'm flattered you're willing to go the full mile for this.
So charming.
While this isn't on the same level as someone's wedding, it is a special occasion for me. You look charming. I wasn't gonna lay around and let you outdress me. I knew you would if I went for anything less. So that's the story behind the ensemble. Arching an eyebrow, you watched Baxter turn away. He softly chuckled, and you teasingly poked him in the center of his chest. Honestly, I think you're shining far beyond than me. I just like how awkward this one is. Your suit is cool, I guess. I did not expect brown for you. I know what you mean. I found it's an exemplary piece to wear when I want to step outside the lines of black tie formal. He idly adjusted the cuffs of his suit jacket. Your eyes followed that movement. I've been told the set is an attention grabber. Automatically, you glanced up and caught the gentle curve of his smile.
So?
Shall we go? Time to paint the town red. I can certainly work with that plan. On that note, the two of you left the apartment behind and gallivanted off into the city. It was exhilarating to run off with little warning to who knew where with Baxter Ward by your side. You felt all of 18 years old again, and you had no idea until just now how deeply you missed this. The engine cut off and Baxter's latest mystery location was unidentifiable. Closing the car door, all you could see was a small empty lot and a few street lamps keeping it lit. This lot sat behind a huge building, but from this spot you had no way of knowing what the inside could be. The back was entirely non-distinct, just an imposing white wall. And here we are? Yes, there's a door ahead. Baxter led you away from the car and towards a back door you had missed entirely in the shadows. He opened it with little effort and slipped inside. Perplexed, you stood there and stared into the dark void Baxter disappeared into.
Come on.
Right this way. You could kind of see his arm in the doorway, and Baxter motioned for you to follow. You had anticipated being surprised by where he was taking you, but this was way more unusual than ever his usual fare. He's just black. Following inside, you struggled to see anything without the tiny rays of light filtering through the doorway. I sure fucking hope he holds my hand and leads the way. Bitch, it's dark. He gently took your hand in his, and the door fell shut. No explanations were offered. Instead, Baxter acted under the assumption that you'd blindly come with him. And he was right. Baxter went ahead with confident steps. You trusted him enough to believe this wasn't a mistake. Oh no, this is like an axe murder situation for sure. Wherever the two of you were, he at least knew the pitch-black hallway. He found precisely where to reach to open another door. In the next black void, you caught a faint echo of your own footsteps stopping by his side. Next to you, the door felt like glass under your fingertips. Baxter lightly squeezed you, and then he let go. Wait here, please. I'll get the lights. There was nothing else to do. Listening closely, you could hear Baxter's steps bounce around the presumed open space as he strolled ahead. He moved further and further away until you heard the loud click of multiple switches being flipped. Several rows of lights zapped on in succession. Okay. I mean, I was gonna make a question before I saw the background, but now I'm like, okay. Multiple rows of lights. I was like, where the fuck did you bring us? The lights flashed to their full brightness and blinded you. Shielding your face, you were aware of Baxter moving in your direction.
I'm sorry.
I should have warned you. Are you alright? Squinting, your blurry sight gradually adjusted. You finally got an idea of where you were. A big, nearly empty room with a shiny tiled floor. It was strange. Something was familiar about the picture. Almost like you'd seen this room before. That was it. You had seen it before. Specifically in the photos Scott and Jude sent before their wedding. This must have been where they practiced with Baxter. Is this your work building? Correct. Baxter revealed the ring of keys hooked around his finger and spun it, his expression impish. If we're being technical, we're long closed for the day. However, I happen to have keys. I would not be surprised at you breaking and entering, I guess, into your own workplace. Are we going to be arrested for breaking and entering? I didn't read the things before I said that. You can't do that. I'm not going to say that. I guess I'll joke. Are we going to be arrested for this? No, not at all. I'm allowed to visit at any time, even when customers are not.
Of course.
What if I need to access a file in the office? Weddings, as you know, are a juggling act of many moving pieces. The difficulty would only increase if the work fell exclusively within a window of set hours. Yeah. A single wedding was chaotic enough, but planning them as a career could easily be more than a full-time job. He'd have to ready to tackle needs and demands whenever they hit. Exactly. The higher powers that be understand we do what we must. I can come and go from the building as I please.
Honestly.
Though bringing a friend here is not entirely an expected reason for coming. Personally, I'd say this still counts as job adjacent. You're helping me maintain my professional dancing form. The owners are highly understanding.
See?
And excuses are only necessary if we're caught, which might not even happen. I'm sure they have, like, cameras for, like, security or whatever, but, I mean, okay. Mischief twinkled in his eyes. He seemed so certain in his abilities that you had to believe Baxter would never be taken to task for the stunt. There was no way you could have predicted this situation if you tried. Versus me going, no, I could see him breaking and entering into his own office. I wasn't expecting it for this, but okay. Baxter Ward was an enigma. Mom and Liz were right to threaten to call the cops. You're a criminal.
Maybe.
Only in a certain light. One moment, please. Holding up a single digit, Baxter politely dipped his head and then went to the counter by the far wall. Sorry, I was imagining the single digit being this one. He was messing with something there, but you couldn't tell what while you walked to the center of the room. These all mean the same thing. These all mean the same thing. The last one, I guess. Music began playing, and Baxter promptly returned to the center of the room. He hummed along the melody. Baxter placed a hand across his heart.
You know?
As you know, I enjoy a nice waltz around the room. I hate you so much right now. However, I'm not a one-trick pony, and I'm not selfish enough to only want to stick with my expertise, okay? I'm open to experimentation. Why do I get to choose a genre? Okay, I went through the options really briefly just to see. If you say this one, he gets really excited, which is really cute, and I'm gonna go for that. If you say, I want to see something different, he then says, like, oh, we have music styles
Exciting.
for... and then gives you all of these. My good bitch. I didn't see this one, but I assume it's similar to this.
Exciting.
Yeah, it's the same thing. You can stop saying exciting. It's okay. But I thought it was really cute, the expression he made when I did this. Also, I keep banging my knee against my table. Baxter's face brightened gloriously.
Gladly.
Then I will. With that, Baxter showed you a remote you'd never seen before. The question bounced on the tip of your tongue, but your gaze trailed towards the back of the room, and the answer struck. It was obvious once you realized. The sound system was hidden behind the counter, and he must have grabbed the remote when he was there. Baxter swapped through the music tracks until he found something that was sufficiently waltz-esque. Then he slipped the remote into his jacket pocket. I hate you. For a few seconds, Baxter closed his eyes and listened carefully to the music. He then captured your gaze and bowed politely. The waltz was smooth and romantic, as if the dancers were floating air. Okay. It wasn't hard to understand why Baxter loved it so much. It was a blast watching Baxter dance in the huge empty building. The time melted away until you could hardly guess how much time had passed. Then the music shifted. The conclusion of the current song was on the horizon, and you just knew this was going to be the conclusion. Yeah, okay, the conclusion was the conclusion. Baxter landed a foot definitively and clapped his hands once in time with the final note. Both of you were giggling. What the fuck was that? Your eyes stayed locked onto one another. The music's end left you both suspended in silence. You hoped that you would have the chance to witness Baxter this happy again 1,000,000 times more. My dude, my bro, my man, you've still got it. Your boisterous cheer put a prideful smirk on his face. Baxter readjusted his collar. I do, don't I? Sliding backwards, Baxter made sure there was enough room and then gave you a grand bow. He stared up at you from between the strands of his bangs before standing straight again. Might I get you a drink after being so kind to join me here? From where? There's a water cooler right at the back. He didn't even need to check. Baxter nudged his head towards something past his shoulder. Leaning, you peeked past him and spotted it instantly. Oh. Sure. His lips pressed into a sweet smile, and then Baxter turned on his heels.
I can do that.
2 waters, coming up. Baxter sauntered to the water cooler and fetched you both something to drink. A minute later, he passed you a cup of water. He tilted his head back to swallow a large sip. He brought the cup down again and combed his swoop of bangs to the side with his other hand. Now we could continue standing here, but there's somewhere better we can rest our feet. Would you care to follow me? At this point, I'm up for anything. Bring it on.
Lovely.
Sure. Baxter casually dropped the remote off at the counter and shut down the music system completely. Leaning against the glass door, you waited for him to finish. Then you left that room behind and traveled down a different hallway. Now that Baxter wasn't maintaining a mystery, he switched on several lights along the way. It was almost comical how the two of you were tiptoeing through the closed business. Glancing at a clock, it was already pretty late, but at this point you doubted that anyone was going to discover this mischief. Taking your drinks for the trip, Baxter brought you to a much more familiar spot. He swung the door open with extra confidence. Welcome back to my office, Kit. Make yourself at home. Walking into the center of the room, you did a spin to inspect everything in sight. Pivoting, you then turned towards Baxter. You know, I thought I'd never see this place again. That's understandable. It was touch and go for a while, wasn't it? Baxter flicked a hand as he walked and talked. He went straight for the couch and settled down on it. He immediately got comfortable by stretching his legs and slinging his arm along the back. The whole time his gaze rested on you. On the other end of the couch? I don't know. Flopping down, you stretch your arms high in the air before slowly letting them drop down to your sides. It felt great to be off your feet. Relaxing even further, Baxter idly ran his free hand along the purple fabric. How strange, being on this side of the room. Yeah. What a list of options. Just reading the first two. So you volunteer versus, hey, if you got married, do you think you'd plan it yourself or would you get a wedding planner? If you could design your own ideal wedding, what would the theme be? Did you design The Office? Did you design The Office? I would think that you did, but...
No.
Really? Almost everything was done by the higher-ups. They have their own sources of furniture. I'm not allowed to move out pieces or put in new ones, at least for the large items. I was granted a little wiggle room to express my own preferences. Baxter leaned in close, like the information was a heavily guarded secret. Smirking, you pointed with your thumb. Let me guess, it was the rug. I had the privilege to choose the couch color. Oh. The hand slung along the back of the couch patted the cushion. What an awkward sentence. Baxter's lip twisted smugly.
Of course.
It served me quite well. Purple is lovely, isn't it? Uh-huh. Also, I did give permission to have a black and white rug. I knew it. Baxter cracked up at your explosion of a response. He tried to hide it by covering his mouth, but his shoulders shook too much to be anything other than laughter. Baxter plucked the cup he had brought with him off the table and took another sip. Slowly, he lowered it and let out a wistful sigh. Thanks for indulging me tonight, Kit. This has been the most fun I've had in I don't know how long.
To be honest,
I do know now that I want to dance again outside of work. For myself, okay? I'm sorry for brushing you off about this topic before. In a way, I fell out of love with that passion. It became tedious and unsatisfying to do it with complete strangers, and I didn't have enough hours in a day to dedicate to a long-term competitive partner any longer. But perhaps I should have tried harder not to give it up entirely. Baxter leaned an elbow on the arm of the chair and rested his cheek against his knuckles. His mouth twitched. How embarrassing. Even my choice of hobby revolved around having a serious and understanding relationship with someone else. The precise matter I've had a lifelong struggle to obtain. I don't think my 8-year-old self was trying to make a statement when he decided this activity was worth pursuing, but still, it's quite fitting, huh? Yeah, you should pursue hobbies even as an adult. Easier said than done, but I'm definitely willing to try now. Good. It'd be a waste to let yourself forget how fun this is.
Thank you.
It's certainly much better having someone else share in the delight of my hobby with me. Baxter placed the paper cup on the table, in no hurry to finish his drink. Then he shifted snugly into the cushions of the couch. He settled in for a nice, long visit. The whole while, he quietly watched you sit there at his side. Despite the apparent casualness of this trip to the office, Baxter's eyes were oddly intent. The reason why was opaque. He had secrets still. All mention of dancing and partners and Baxter's past drifted away. When he spoke again, he doubled back to the topic of his work. I've seen dozens of couples come and go in this room by now. Each time I felt disconnected from the experience they were going through, as much as I made an effort to relate. Parties and pressure and endless tiny details, those are concepts I can grasp. But a major hitch remained. I never could imagine myself getting married. He admitted it apologetically with a small shrug. How unspeakable it must sound for a wedding planner to never want one of his own. I do enjoy weddings as a concept, a lifetime of love and hope distilled into a single glorious event. They're an achievement in their own right, if you can get that far and actually pull it off.
But
For the couple, it is, or at least it should be, only the beginning. Not so for me. A wedding is a dead end. It always has been. I assumed it always would be. The metaphorical passing was given a real moment of silence. What do you follow that with? Not even Baxter knew at first. I lose contact with my clients when the job is done. Of course, that won't be a shock to your seasoned ears. Some of those couples might carry the bliss of wedding with them for decades, and others might have their happiness vanish like smoke as soon as the day is over. Which one it comes to has been an eternal mystery to me. And you may find this difficult to believe, but that summer-long tryst we had was the most stable relationship I've been in. Of course, I wouldn't be able to understand the viewpoint of someone willing to commit themselves to another person for the rest of their lives. It's what makes for a good planner. I can get invested just enough in the premise to truly create something special, but I'm not attached to the real relationship. And I'm not disappointed when it's over. It's been years since I was careless enough to be hurt by anything. Baxter visibly closed himself off from the world, shutting his eyes and crossing both his arms and legs. He sighed. I'd given up on trying for more than I already had. Then I told others, and myself, that meant I was always content, but honestly, it made me bitter. I didn't become the person I wanted to be. I didn't achieve the kind of life I'd hoped for. My few victories were hollow, and I'm still sorry I took that out on you at the start of this. Nothing might have pained him, but that didn't make it easier on you. It was heartbreaking to hear the reality of what became of your old flame over the past 5 years. One of Baxter's eyes opened a crack, and a thin grin unfurled across his face.
Hey.
Do you want to know something absolutely embarrassing? Not exactly. You didn't want him to be ashamed or unhappy anymore, but he told you anyway, maybe as an effort to undo the depressing words he shared a minute ago. Or maybe he genuinely made peace with that part of his past. Jude and Scott actually attempted to speak to me about our situation. What? When? It was during that final afternoon before their big day. The 3 of us had come here for dance lessons and gone to suit rental stores, but at one point we took a break. The 2 sat me down then to have a friendly discussion. They were, I lie to you not, worried about me. They noticed I was sad. I was their wedding planner. It was literally my job to speak to them about their relationship. And instead they were trying to offer advice for my own personal issues. Recollecting the scene, Baxter pinched his brows and squeezed the bridge of his nose. That wry smile of his didn't get puckered up. Every time I'm arrogant enough to believe I know what I'm doing and that I'm in control, I don't, and I'm not. Come on, you're doing pretty good in my opinion. This was good. It was progress. Whenever Baxter was willing to speak about himself, it meant a great deal. It was a plea for something, that was certain. There was only one problem. You continuously failed to grasp. What? Baxter released his face to instead dismissively wave away the short story he brought up. Thank you. We don't need to recount the mortifying details of what they said. It was like a song had begun to play, and Baxter danced to it on his own. Even if you wanted to join, he only knew the next step. That's not what matters here. He switched the focus of this inexplicable chat yet again. Just watching him twirl to the silent rhythm made your head spin, particularly because of what it came to. It's you, actually. You're important to me, and they knew it. I'm grateful we met, Kit, even though I ended what we had.
Never.
I was never sorry that I knew you, or rather I felt privileged that my path led to where you were. For a short time. Have I said that before? That specifically? I know I've given other kinds of compliments. Propping an elbow on the armrest, Baxter leaned his cheek against a fist like the definition of nonchalance. Opening up, then pulling in, he couldn't settle on what he was comfortable with. The absurdity wasn't lost on the man himself. Baxter furnished a smirk. And I'm not making any sense, am I? Simply going on in circles without a point in sight. His voice softened when he looked at you. Really looked. When he didn't think so much, when he wasn't caught up in every little worry, all that remained was a gentle affection. My normal strength of forwardness is failing me, yet I'm apparently incapable of coming up with a more nuanced approach to either. What a shame. And still, I refuse to wait for another chance. Baxter had definitely made it to a point where he was muttering literally whatever came to mind whenever it did. No filters, no careful consideration, only stream of consciousness admissions. Though you'd started to suspect that would mean he was prepared to say more than he ever had before. Flexibility is usually my approach, but there are some situations where I can be stubborn. I appreciate how patiently you've let me ramble. Today and over this entire trip, I've spent our entire time together dancing around the heart of the matter. If you'll humor me, I'd like to share with you one more truth about myself. You'll only need to listen for a little longer. He shifted his whole body over to face you completely, curled one leg on the cushion and let the other fall to the floor. Baxter paused inches apart from you. Then, he leaned closer. The act filled the enclosed space with an unexpected tension. Sure, after the wedding, Baxter had stopped being insistently reserved around you, and yes, you had physically been even closer only a few minutes ago when you danced. But that was still different. And wait, had it been a few minutes? He suddenly found it difficult to remember how long you'd been alone in that room together. All that could capture your attention was Baxter's pretty face. Ooh, okay, damn. And the way he was captivated. By you, too.
Now?
What inspired this scattered train of thought, at least in the current moment, was mentioning how I wished for a dance partner. Oh boy. One I could be with time after time instead of a string of strangers. To finally continue with that track of conversation, I must admit that I don't want just anybody to fill the role. I have designs on someone specific. Someone I first shared a dance with 10 years ago, when we met by chance at a summer soiree. Baxter, you can't do this, it's my birthday. Today's my birthday, you have to choose a different day.
It's you.
Yeah, no, I got that. He smiled, and it was the kind of sweetness you thought that only poets could write of. I like you, Kit. Quite a great deal. A stranger might not have noticed the slight tremble in his voice, the delicate way his words were punctuated with a breath, as if he were afraid of saying the wrong thing. But you noticed, because he let you. Is the subtlety too much? Well, it isn't me regardless, because honestly, I'm not speaking about dancing. Not exclusively.
I want to be with you.
I know. That felt like a really lame reaction, I'm sorry. Finally, he offered you a hand to take. He was willing to share with you the steps of his dance. Metaphorically. In reality, you remain stock still in his office. I believe it's rather obvious why, but if I'm going to tell you, there's no harm in elaborating, is there? In for a penny, in for a pound. He chuckled to himself, but didn't call any further attention to it. You are beyond charming, I know, and your considerate nature calls to mind all the good there is in this world. Okay, damn. I've known that for as long as I've had the pleasure of knowing you. He drew in a breath, smoothly moving towards your face. Enjoying myself in your presence is the most natural thing in the world. Frustratingly so at times. I find myself letting go of more than I intended to. Another beat. In the prolonged silence, he tapped his foot, just once.
You're incredible.
Thanks. You've never allowed me to wallow in my misery, except for when you had to. When I made you have to, because you couldn't get a hold of me. But when I see you, I'm reminded of what it's like to be seen. How it feels to have someone who knows you, cares about you, has memories with you, who wants to make more memories together. And I tried to undo that. His hand tightened around the arm of the couch, his brown eyes smoldering with a familiar self-loathing, even as his voice took a gentler tone when he spoke of you, Smack. Twice, by keeping you as far away from me as I could. And still, you... What I'm saying to you now is what I should have said 5 years ago. If you can believe me, I was aware of that, even then. But I didn't say anything of the sort. Instead, I said nothing. I left your life for good as if I didn't care at all. At least that was the expectation, that it would be for good.
Lovely.
And here we are, together again. This world has a delightful sense of humor. Don't you agree? Yeah, sure, and it's not because I paid $5 for you to have this conversation with me. I can tell you this after so long because you always left a place for me. The joke is that the DLC costs $5. I realized after I said that I paid $5 for him to have this conversation, that to be fair, this is the same game where you get paid $20 to be friends with Cove. So I just wanted to, in real life, I paid $5 for this conversation. His adoration rang clearly in his gestures, in his voice, in the way he gazed at you. Though he tinged the air with his own remorse, that heart-rending warmth remained. Unfortunately, I've yet to think of a good reason why this admission isn't another of my patently bad ideas. It isn't as though I've been thoughtful in return. His lips curled up with a quiet, apologetic laugh. Baxter didn't quite smile. I can't stand doing anything in the morning, even if I can pretend to, for my clients. As you know, I can't afford elaborate trips these days. My only remaining social contacts are limited to the wedding industry, not performative theater or owners or fancy cars or the like. I've never been a good partner, even a good friend, to anyone who has crossed my path. It's entirely because of me that we're not still together. By all accounts, I shouldn't be asking for anything from anyone, especially you. But is it too selfish of me to want to? If I let you go again without saying anything, if you leave after all of this and I stayed silent, I would regret it. I'd regret it more than I would having to see what happens after I've said it, no matter what comes. So that's what I honestly think and how it came to this. Kit, if you can, I would like to know how you feel about me in return. Why are you making this sound like you're asking a ghost? You're like sitting there with your hands on one of those, boards, and you're trying to... If you can speak, say yes. Baxter held your gaze now, steady and certain, and regarded you in all your wholeness. The parts of you that you yourself didn't like, and the parts of you that you did. He looked at you now, and it felt as though he'd never look away. It burned, in a new and equally familiar way, like you'd spent too long in front of a glowing fire. I don't like any of these, to be honest. I want to know what happens if I just look at him, if we just stare at each other. You'd never looked into his eyes so extensively before. I guess we're just gonna get a description of his eyeballs. His eyelashes were long and his irises were a clear, focused brown, flecked with lighter shades. It was grounding, and there was a flicker of doubt that crept in when he opened his mouth. A quick word was already tucked into his cheek to escape the tense silence. But he didn't turn from the heavy reality of what he'd said, or from you. This was a truth he could not withhold. Everything was threatening to spill over. All your feelings, all your reservations, all your hopes from all these years. Was it time to let him know? Was it safe to? He didn't say anything else. He didn't move. Baxter just waited for something, for you to tell him how you felt. The truth. Time felt as if it were wet sand passing through an hourglass. I like how there's no. Not that I would have said it, because this is what we're here for, but I like that there's no. I guess before I had the no, but I really want to say this, but I feel like now is not the moment. I feel like there are times when I can be mean to him and, tease him, but I feel like there are times when he, legitimately needs me to chill the fuck out and be serious. I vaguely like this one. I don't like this one. Go away. This bitch didn't propose. What are you saying this for? This feels weird. I guess you're important to me? Pat, pat. I misread that as licked. I liked you back then, too.
What?
Sorry, I want to hear that again.
What?
Okay. You did? Yeah. When we knew each other 5 years ago, I wanted to be with you even then. That left Baxter stunned and knew, bitch, we were dating. He couldn't narrow his eyes enough for that amount of disbelief and simply shut them entirely. I see. He was whispering, embarrassed enough to be blushing up to the tips of his ears. Not in his sprite, he's not. There's nothing going on with these ears. Even the size of his neck seemed to stand out with the color, all the more so when he realized how quickly he was breathing, and Baxter proceeded to cover his mouth with his hand. He's gonna have a panic attack? His eyebrows knitted together, eyes suddenly askance. Askance? Don't know. As he tried to look at literally anything or anyone that wasn't you for fear of making himself any more, well, that. It was sweet, finally being able to see how he felt without having to pry for it. He came out. Yay, let's go, Baxter. Said his piece and let you know that he cared about you. Even now, he was still showing it, albeit in a different way than you'd gotten the chance to see in your entire relationship, friends and otherwise. Closing his eyes, Baxter took in a breath through his nose as he tried to calm down. After a few more exhales, it partially worked to settle him, though the way he glanced at you and then looked away again was confirmation that it hadn't done as much as he hoped. He gave up on approaching your answer with his usual poise.
Hallelujah.
God fucking damn it. Never have I been so nervous to ask someone out. Including when I asked you to date me before. One would think I'd be able to draw on that experience, and yet... He smiled at you again, coyly. My apologies, I frankly don't know what to say. I'm unable to recall what one even does in these kinds of situations. Take your time. Yeah, I mean, take your time. Pat, pat. Well, you're certainly right. Some of the color began dissipating as he considered your words for a second. We have all the time in the world now, don't we? To continue being truthful, I can't feel my legs anymore. Out of nowhere, okay? With his head against the wall behind the couch, he closed his eyes and took another moment to compose himself. Finally, he turned in his seat to look at you. His dreamy expression was somehow abstracted, somehow not. It reminded you of the state he'd been in this morning, except there were no flights of fancy here. It was just the two of you, coming down from one of the biggest revelations you'd had all summer. Your entire life, with respect given to Baxter's proclivity for running. Wonderful. I'm beginning to remember some possibilities. Resting his arm against the top edge of his seat, Baxter reached with his opposite hand to tilt your face towards him, gross. His nose brushed against yours, eyelashes close enough to rest against your cheek.
My pleasure.
Absolutely not. It was this that Baxter took his time with. You closed your eyes, in preparation. You weren't really sure what to expect when his lips met yours. I like every single time that he blushes because he goes from like, I don't know, kind of the same face out of the corner of my eye, and then all of a sudden it just lights up. Like if you're looking at the text and you just see, poof. He was breathless, and your noses clumsily bumped into each other from the angle that he had canted inward, but it did nothing to dissuade either of you. Everything went quiet, and you couldn't be distracted by anything but him as his mouth insistently sought you out as you fell, lips fitting together like the last piece of a puzzle. He wanted you, wanted to tell you. Is this enough? Was he enough? When he withdrew, the answer was there with flushed cheeks and pink lips. Of course. Thanks. I adore you. After a beat, Baxter brushed back his bangs, though they spilled onto his face again. A flicker of concern crossed his expression again, and Baxter coughed to clear his throat. I do have one more question. Please ask. That's way better than never trying to find out. True. He chuckled to his own chagrin, lifting a hand to cover his mouth. Was I obvious? My feelings. I mean, Jude was rather direct in his asking me if I still felt this way about you. The pink didn't leave the tips of his ears. That would be the embarrassing context to our conversation, I fear. They asked him what? MCB for real? I was following along in Baxter's conversation better than the main character was. Baxter grinned, witnessing the expression on your face, but continued. Jude and Scott picked out their outfits for the wedding, and while still fully dressed in a three-piece suit, Jude asked me point blank if I was into you. If that was what's going on here. Jude is pretty sharp. Jude is pretty sharp. I would have dreaded knowing him in any seriousness when we were teenagers. Baxter had completely overcome his sheepishness. It was a loss, given he'd only been embarrassed in front of you maybe a handful of times before it came out in full force today. But his usual charm was equally as, charming. In any case, I didn't want to admit it to either of them before I even had the chance to tell you, but if Jude acts self-satisfied when we come to him as a couple, you'll know why. He waved his hand dismissively, rolling his eyes a little. The false disdain faded just as quickly as it arrived, Baxter's expression softening as he turned towards you. That same hand held your cheek now, digits gently curling against it. And we are together again, aren't we?
I love it.
How decidedly unexpected of us. Gone was any reservation about conveying his affection. Baxter's smile finally reached his eyes. Ever confident and self-assured, both halves of the same person you knew finally overlapped. I should have found a better place to romance you. An office? Honestly, Baxter, I'm usually so deft at selecting ideal venues. It suited you. What? Finding each other at a time of night when you shouldn't be awake, in a place you shouldn't be, and between the two of you who felt like you could never be, you and Baxter took the first step. It's perfect, Baxter. After all of that, does this... Excuse me? Excuse me? Excuse me? Excuse me? I want to know what it says. I want to know what it says afterwards. Especially with the way Baxter was looking at you. Ooh, damn. Okay, do I need warnings? There are cameras in the room. Damn. Anyway, for a completely normal playthrough, you were completely at ease being together with Baxter. Being pressed against him, you took in Baxter's cologne. With every breath, I have a hair in my mouth. It was flowery, but not quite a perfume. The floral notes were fresh, sharp, and there was an undercurrent of spice. A mature scent for a gentleman, of course. For a time, you rested on the couch, saying nothing and listening only to the beat. Oh, Jesus. This is too much for me. But when the idea of relaxing crossed into the risk of falling asleep while breaking and entering, you and Baxter decided to sit up properly again. It wasn't long before you both finished the last drops of your water and tossed the paper cups into the office's trash bin, definitely needed after the other thing that was going on. Tirely rubbing his shoulder, Baxter released a satisfied breath.
Well,
we should go. If we linger too much longer, I'm afraid operating hours might begin while we're here. That would be difficult to explain. Oh, yeah, good idea. Baxter rose to his feet and brushed off any lint that might have gotten onto his suit jacket. He nudged his head towards the door. You moved to follow. He brought you down the same path. Baxter and you turned the lights off as he went along. Once you reached the parking lot, you waited for Baxter to lock up the building. After a day delightful enough to rival the wedding itself, you and Baxter finally returned home. And with that, I think that I am finally going to end this episode here. We are a bit over the hour, but I felt like we should finish this moment. And it was a little bit long. We had a lot of things that we could potentially do there. Let me tell you, not what I expected to do for my birthday, but what a celebration, am I right? Woohoo! It's official. I don't know what to say to end this out. I'm flustered. Leave me alone. Thank you for watching this episode. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time for some more Our Life, Beginnings and Always, Baxter's Route.